Hello, my name's Roger Watson and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Nurse Education in Practice, and welcome to this session on the publishing process. Now in this session I'm going to run through some basic aspects of the publishing process from the editorial perspective, but they're meant to be helpful for authors. This is not an advert for Nurse Education in Practice as such, although I will refer to aspects of the journal to exemplify one or two of the points that I'm trying to make. So thanks very much for joining me, and I hope you find this useful. Just a brief introduction to Nurse Education in Practice. We have an international editorial board. At the present time, we publish 8 volumes per year. We have an impact factor of 1.614, placing us 45th in the table of Clarivate nursing journals. And in 2019, the last time that the data were collected, we had 2,351 citations to articles in Nurse Education in Practice. Now I want to introduce the editorial team. In addition to myself, there's a Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Mary Sidebotham from Griffith University in Australia. She's also responsible for the midwifery content in the journal. Then there's a team of 6 editors: Megan Cooper from University of South Australia in Australia, Teresa Cower from Columbia University in the United States, Catherine Hinchliffe-Smith from De Montfort University in the United Kingdom, Sarah Urter from St. Louis University in the United States, and from the United Kingdom, Austin Snowden from Edinburgh Napier University and Tessa Watts from Cardiff University. Just to give you some idea of where our articles come from, this is the trend of the top 10 countries and regions in 2020. You can see that a great deal of our content comes from Asia, and indeed the country which submits most manuscripts is Turkey, followed by the United States, then China and United Kingdom and Australia, and some other countries below that. This of course isn't all the countries that submit, these are the top 10. You also notice that the number of submissions from Asia has increased over the years very noticeably. However, if we compare that with the accepted articles by country and region, the top country is Australia, followed by the United Kingdom, then United States, Spain, and so forth. So the articles accepted don't necessarily reflect the articles submitted. And the biggest selection of articles that are accepted in the journal come from Europe. Now, this is a representation of the publishing process, and anyone who's been involved in submitting to a journal will be familiar with it. And it's a common way of representing the process. Down at the bottom left, we've got you, or indeed me, submitting our article, submitting our manuscript. And I'm an author as well as an editor, so I'm well used to this process and I'm very familiar with it. Our objective is to get up to the top right of the diagram and to have our paper accepted. However, it's never easy, and what it can seem like to an author, especially an inexperienced or a new author, is that all you have are a series of people along the way trying to make life difficult for you and trying to make acceptance of your manuscript and subsequent publication as difficult as possible. There's the editor-in-chief, editors, reviewers, and other personnel from the journal. Now that's what it can seem like, and indeed sometimes does feel like that. However, it's not meant to be like that. We're not here to make things difficult for you. We're here to try and help you to get published, and I'm going to try and show you how in this presentation. At the outset, I'll say 2 things. One, There's no guaranteed way of getting published, and I can't give you one. However, if you don't follow some of the simple guidance that I'm going to lay out here, then you are almost guaranteed not to be accepted. The other thing that I wanted to say was that, contrary to being there to stop you from getting published, we're there to help you, and we're there to help you publish the best article you can, one that you can live with and one that we can live with. And the process of editing and reviewing articles is meant not only to prevent some articles from being accepted, but for those that are accepted, to make them the best they can be. So that's really what the process is about. Don't try to memorize this diagram. It's here to represent the flow of manuscripts from submission through to either rejection or acceptance. I'll point out some of the stages in the process. When the manuscript is submitted by you, by the author, the first person to see it is an administrative assistant who runs a few technical checks on it. Things like similarity to other sources, and also a checklist of the type of manuscript against the criteria in the guidance, and one or two other points. If they're not happy with the manuscript at this stage, they will send it back to you for amendment and further checking. Once they're happy with it, it will then go to one of the editors-in-chief. If it's a midwifery paper, it will go to the midwifery editor-in-chief. All the rest come to me. Now we can take a decision at this stage to reject the manuscript, and this is called desk rejection. At this stage, you will not receive an explanation of any kind, or if you do, it will be very cursory about why the paper is being rejected. Essentially, we feel it doesn't meet the criteria for the journal. That's the reason we reject at this stage. And we try to do this as quickly as possible so that you can decide to amend it or submit it to another journal. We look to see if the manuscript fits the scope of the journal, whether it meets a specific type of manuscript that we specify in the journal, whether the title is attractive and descriptive and tells us what the study is about. Does the language in the paper look good, perhaps just from reading the abstract? We may scan the rest of the paper, we may not. We may also check it for some criteria. And ultimately what we're trying to do is find papers which will be likely to be accepted, so we don't overburden the editorial and review system, and if they are accepted, are likely to be cited in the journal by other journals subsequently. The papers are assigned to an editor. The editors invite reviewers, the reviews are returned to the editors, and then the editors have to make a decision and a recommendation regarding the paper. They can make a decision to reject, and the author will be informed of the reasons. Most likely, we hope, they will make a recommendation that the paper be revised. It goes back to you, you revise it, comes back to the editor. Once they're happy, they will push it on for acceptance. It's very rare for a paper to go directly from an editor to acceptance. They will almost always require some revision. Once the editor has recommended acceptance up on the top right, that's the green box at the top right, it comes to the editor-in-chief who makes a final decision about acceptance, checks the article, does some light editing of the article and puts it forward to production. After that, in a few weeks' time, the paper will appear as a proof online and finally be assigned to an issue of the journal. So understanding the publishing process is crucial, and understanding the publishing process is quite simple. Write first for editors, and it's easy writing for editors because we tell you what we want. We lay this out in the guidance for the journal. You must check the guidance for the journal. If you meet it all, you're well on the way to at least having your paper put forward to an editor for further consideration. Write for reviewers as well. These are experts, either clinical or methodological or educational experts. Write the paper as if you know the best expert in the world is going to read it. One of the common reasons why papers are rejected by reviewers is they say, we don't understand what this author has done here. Make everything clear and think about your reviewers and think how you're going to address the likely points that they will have. And finally, your audience. You don't really have to write for your audience, because if you don't address what the editors want and subsequently what the reviewers want, then you won't reach your audience. So the point behind this slide is really to emphasize write first for editors. This is the landing page for Nurse Education Practice, and it gives you all sorts of information about the journal, mostly through drop-down menus. The most important aspect of the landing page of this journal and any journal is the guide for authors, so please check it. I would always strongly recommend that before you even begin to write a manuscript that you choose a journal, because then you can write it for that journal, and you know how to write it for that journal, and if you are writing it for that journal, by checking the guidance. So the guidance is available under a series of hypertext and drop-down menus, or you can download the PDF guide. Please always check the guidance when you go to a journal, even if you've submitted to it before or recently. Guidance is regularly updated. Now, just a word about the impact factor. The impact factor means different things in different parts of the world, and most people have a general idea of what it means, but not really a specific idea. I will say that it's very important for publishers and for editors. It is one of the main ways in which our journals are judged. We can have arguments about the relevance and the meaning and the ethics of the impact factor, but nothing will shift the fact that it's there. It's a fairly simple, straightforward measure. Nothing has really supplanted it yet. And while it's there, I think we should know what it means. And as authors, it's quite important to understand how we view the impact factor, because it does dictate to us the kind of articles that we're most likely to accept. So as you can see from the diagram, which is based on 2006 impact factor, the impact factor is based on a calculation of the papers cited in the year of reporting the impact factor to articles in the previous 2 years. That's an arbitrary calculation. And these are divided by the number of articles published in 2004 and 2005, or the previous 2 years. So, put simply, the impact factor is citations in 1 year to articles published in the previous 2 years. The articles considered are the usual content of the journal, the original articles and reviews and discussion papers. Things like editorials and letters are not considered in the denominator. However, they are important to editors because citations in these within the previous 2 years do count towards the numerator. So it's a complicated formula, but essentially quite simple, but the components of it are set by Clarivate, who calculate this every year. And the impact factor usually comes out somewhere around the middle of the year. Which papers contribute most to the impact factor is important to understand, because this can help you to decide what to submit to a journal. And I'm not saying you should only submit these, but it will tell you something about the likelihood of a paper at least going forward to an editor and ultimately being accepted. Review papers contribute most to the impact factor. This is well known. So journals like review papers. Then methodological papers are also known to contribute to impact factor. They get cited more than other papers. So papers that explicate methods or develop new methods. Both review papers and methodological papers are very much favoured, for example, by doctoral students and other researchers. However, 90% of the content of most journals is original research, and this contributes a great deal overall to the citations and the impact factor. However, individual original research papers don't contribute as much as an individual review paper, and in fact, some original research papers are never cited. And here we've got the top 10 articles from 2020 in the year to date, and you can see that the second and third most cited articles are reviews. There are only 2 of them here. However, if you look at the other articles, you can't really see a pattern in the kind of articles, but it's very clear to see that there's a pattern in the reviews. Also, the same if you look at the most cited articles published in all time in the journal. Here you've got the top 2 are reviews and another review there. Again, it's the only pattern that you can see amongst the types of articles. And this also applies to downloads. So review papers are not only important to the impact factor of the journal, they're important for the income. Some of these downloads will have been paid for directly, but it's downloads that are used to encourage libraries to buy the journals and to buy part of the bundles of the journals that they come in. So I just want to emphasize the importance of review papers to editors, to journals and to publishers. What gets published? Well, in NEP currently, since we've revised the guidelines, we publish editorials. Although we commission these, we don't accept guest editorials being sent to us. We only commission them. We publish review papers and original papers and discussion papers. But under the original papers, there are different categories of paper. Please just check the guidance. If you're going to publish in a journal, always check the aims and scope. These tell you what the mission of the journal is, what it publishes, the nature of the articles published, in other words, international peer-reviewed articles, and who's the intended readership. Is it clinical, is it academic, or is it educational, for example? Next, the peer review process, and this diagram is supposed to show the cooperative nature of the peer review process, a circular cooperative process which is there to improve the quality of manuscripts and ultimately improve the quality of the published articles. That's really what it's there for. On the left-hand side, the author drafts their manuscript, sends it into the journal. Reviewers act as peers and to some extent as gatekeepers. They help us to only put the best articles through. These go to the editorial process, and ultimately, if they're accepted to production, they go out to the audience. Reading the articles and citing the articles certainly increases attention to the author and hopefully also enhances the author's reputation. So no one's reputation is enhanced by publishing poor articles. So that's really a very important part of the process, the peer review process, in ensuring that the highest quality possible articles are published. We operate, as most journals do, a double-blind peer review system. Under Clarivate, you don't have to have a blind system, but you do have to have at least 2 reviewers. But under a double-blind peer review system, the reviewers don't know who the authors are, and the authors don't know who the reviewers are. This process has got advantages and disadvantages, and some of the disadvantages have led to the development of open peer review. Open peer review is becoming increasingly common, and it's becoming increasingly a requirement of open science, or something that's favoured with an open science, because it's seen to enhance accountability and transparency. Under open peer review, the most open system is one where authors and reviewers know each other, but sometimes it works one way, whereby the reviewers may know who the authors are, but not the other way around. And increasingly, in a wide selection of journals, reviewers are being given the opportunity to reveal who they are if they want to, but it's not always necessarily compulsory. However, some journals like the BMC suite and the PLOS suite of journals use open reviewing all the time, and there's no choice. Your details are given to the authors if you review, and the authors' details are given to the peer reviewers. Moreover, in the BMC suite of journals, the reviews are actually published as well, and this is also considered to be part of good practice and becoming more common. Peer review is widely misunderstood. It's not a scientific process. It's a process of an exchange of opinions, hopefully expert opinion and informed opinion, but nevertheless, it's an exchange of opinions. And peer review, as reported by the ClimateGate report in the UK, is a means of sieving out evident error, currently unacceptable practices, repetition of previously published work without acknowledgement, and trivial contributions that add little to knowledge. In other words, we hope it spots obvious mistakes. We hope it spots unethical practice, for example. We also hope to some extent it helps us to detect plagiarized work, and also even in good articles to say whether this is really substantial, is this really what a high quality journal wants to publish, or should it find a home somewhere else? Now this page doesn't come from my current journal because we don't use the manuscript central system. This comes from a previous journal I worked on, and one of my editors demonstrated to me the problems of peer review and editorial decisions. And here we've got 3 reviewers on the right hand side, all giving a different decision. One says revision is necessary, the other says accept, and the other says reject. In this case there were 3 reviewers. One of these was possibly a statistical reviewer. Now the editor has to negotiate his or her way through these reviews, and they come to the decision based on those reviews, and different journals will take different decisions. I would imagine on journals like NEP or Journal of Advanced Nursing, which have lots of submissions and are very well established journals, that rejection and revision, even if there's an acceptance there, would possibly lead to rejection. On journals which are new, not so well established, or which have infinite space, and this would include many of the open access journals, not because they're poor quality, but because they do have infinite space, this may well lead to a request for revision, but the decision is in the editor's hands. Next, a brief look at the Equator network, which exists to enhance the quality and transparency of health research. Now, under the Equator network, there are endless sets of guidance. Now, I can't remember how many there are, but there are a great many. And the guidance is there to help you publish almost any kind of study that you can think of. Systematic reviews, randomized controlled trials, and qualitative studies, case control studies, for example. And the Equator network guidance is there to help people to report the data, report the studies in the best possible way. I'm only going to look at 2 sets of the guidance, which are probably most relevant to our field. First, I want to look at the consort guidance. Now, you can go straight to consort through Google or through the Equator network. The consort guidance is about the transparent reporting of clinical trials. And here you find 2 important documents, the consort checklist and the consort flow diagram. I'm not going to go through the checklist in any detail, but suffice to say that checking that off helps you to know how to present your study, and good journals like NEP will insist that you use the consort checklist if you're doing trials or experimental work. It also contains a line about registration of trials, which I'll come to in a minute. And also the consort flow diagram, which looks like this. I'm sure you've seen these before. These are there so that every possible person who could have been involved in your trial is recorded, and which arm they went into is recorded, and the point at which they left the study or indeed completed the study. This is an essential document to be submitted and indeed published alongside experimental work. And it helps you to account for every participant and also to do intention to treat analysis to see if dropout differentially affected one arm or the other and whether or not that had an effect on the outcome. Part of the consort guidance is a request for a registration number, and this is concerned with the All Trials campaign, to which all good publishers and all good journals are signed up to and support financially. And the All Trials campaign insists that all trials are registered and subsequently that all results from trials are reported. This is to aid transparency and to try to get rid of publication bias and the bottom drawer phenomenon, whereby trials which don't appear to support a researcher's or particularly a drug company's hypothesis get ignored. If you're doing educational research, you probably don't have to register your trials here, but there are alternative places where you can register your study. For example, the Open Science Framework. So trials can be registered at clinicaltrials.gov in the United States. This is by far the most common trial registration site. Your university or hospital has to be signed up to it. You can't use it as an individual. There's also a Chinese clinical trial registry, and indeed there is a European Union trials registry as well. But there are many registries around the world, and any one of them can be used provided you get an appropriate number whereby your protocol for your study is registered in the public domain and can be found. Next, I want to look at Prisma. Again, Prisma can be obtained directly through Google or through Equator. Prisma is concerned with the transparent reporting of systematic reviews and meta-analysis. It's similar to Consort and indeed produced by the same team of people and has got some similar features, for example, the checklist and the flow diagram. I won't go into the checklist in any detail, but it's a very useful document to consult both when you're designing, but especially when you're reporting a systematic review. We'll take a look at the flow diagram in a minute. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Also worth noting, Prisma is part of Equator, but you can also register your reviews with Prospero, but this only applies to clinical reviews and wouldn't normally apply to reviews of nursing education. And this is the flow diagram, and it's meant to do something very similar to the flow diagram in the consort guidance. It's there so that you can record all the documents that you identified from databases in your search, which ones were duplicates, which were removed, and thereafter which ones were removed in the subsequent screening, and which ones survived, as it were, for your final synthesis and possibly for meta-analysis. Always make sure, as with consort, that when you present one of these flow diagrams, that the numbers add up from the bottom to the top. It's a common error when they don't. And again, this is an essential document to be submitted and subsequently published alongside systematic reviews. The Committee on Publication Ethics exists to promote integrity in research publication, I'll briefly touch on ethics here, although that's the subject of a separate, more detailed presentation. So COPE exists to promote integrity in research and its publication, and it does this by producing training, policy documents or guidance for authors, editors and for reviewers, and also guidance for editors on how to deal with unethical practice. What COPE is really about is contained in their core practices, and these are documents which can be accessed through hyperlinks on the page. These are regularly updated, and the website itself is regularly updated, and you can sign up to COPE. You can become a member if you are an editor, but you can sign up as an author and receive monthly COPE newsletters. And these are interesting to let you see what kind of things go on in the world of publishing, especially with regard to ethical practice. Authorship is an important issue in all publication, and in terms of authorship we adhere to the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and on their landing page there's a link to who can be an author. There's also a link to conflicts of interest. I'm not going to go into either of these in any great detail here. Again, they are the subject of a separate presentation on publication ethics. Suffice to say that authorship should accurately illustrate who contributed to the work and how. And there's actually a useful document from the National Institute for Health in the United States, which is shown here. Again, we'll look at that in more detail in the presentation on ethics, but that gives you an idea of whether or not you can or should be an author, depending on your involvement with a study and with the manuscript that's subsequently been produced. And just to note, I mentioned this at the beginning, we do use a program called Authenticate to run our initial manuscripts through to detect similarity. It doesn't really detect plagiarism, that's a judgment, but it's called anti-plagiarism software. So every document is run through Authenticate. Sometimes we have to retract papers, and this is a retraction on the basis of plagiarism, and the active words here are that the retraction has been agreed due to overlap with other previously published material written by third parties. Please note that if your article is retracted, it doesn't disappear from the journal or from the internet. It's there with a retraction note and possibly a retraction watermark through it like this one has, and unfortunately it's there for everyone to see. So you really want to avoid having papers retracted, especially on ethical grounds. There are other grounds for retracting papers, such as methodological errors, and we all make errors, and other errors in the publication process, but the paper remains in the public domain. We can also retract on the basis of duplication, and the words here are the retraction's been agreed due to duplicate publication of the same article in two journals. This is something, of course, that you mustn't do, and again will be dealt with in more detail in a separate presentation on publication ethics. That's everything I want to say. I just want to draw your attention to a very useful journal called Nurse, Author and Editor, edited currently by Leslie Nichol and supported by the International Association of Nursing Editors, or INANE, and also supported by the publishers Wiley. It's free, you can sign up for alerts, and you can also write for it. But it's mainly written for by editors, and it gives you all sorts of useful advice on very, very prosaic aspects of publication. For example, how to write an introduction, how to write a discussion, but also about more intricate matters of ethics, open access and so forth. I'd strongly advise you to take a look at this. It's open access, you can access it directly. That's my email address if you want to ask me any questions. You can check my own publication record at ORCID. You can follow me on Twitter if you're based in China, or even if you're not based in China, you can follow me on WeChat as well. I hope you found that session useful. Thank you very much for listening.